Mr. Vice President, Mr. Prime Minister, honorable ministers, Mr. Secretary, ambassadors, General Babacar, Chairman Mullen, General Mathis, General Adorno, General Austin, distinguished guests, colleagues. First, it is an honor to be here today, representing the men and the women of U.S. Embassy Baghdad from 16 different U.S. agencies, participating in this change of command ceremony and representing Secretary Clinton as well. And it is a special pleasure to introduce the Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Joseph Biden. As President Obama's point man for U.S. engagement here in Iraq, Vice President Biden is a familiar face for all of us, Iraqi and American alike, engaged and involved in our vital partnership here. His commitment to Iraq goes very deep. The Vice President has visited here as Vice President and previously as Senator over a dozen times since 2003. And the Vice President knows what it is like to have a close family member deployed to the U.S. military here. It's good to have you here among us again, sir. Distinguished guests, colleagues, Iraqi and American, allied, military and civilian, the Vice President of the United States.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the last several years, every time I've been in this old palace, I can't but help think of the irony that we are here today occupying a palace for a noble reason that was once occupied by Saddam Hussein. Secretary Gates, Admiral Mullen, General Mattis, General Odierno, General Austin, Ambassador Jeffrey, our distinguished and honored Iraqi leaders and military. It's an honor to be with you today. It's an honor to be joined by such a distinguished group of Americans and Iraqi commanders and civilian leaders. Bound together, I might add, by, as a nation, we are now bound together as well by years of shared struggle and significant sacrifice. In the pre-dawn hours of March 20th, 2003, columns of coalition troops set off across the desert and marshlands from Kuwait en route to Baghdad. Last week, after 7.5 years that tested our mettle like no conflict in recent American history, the last of our combat units followed that same dusty highway out of Iraq on their way home. As President Obama declared in the Oval Office last night, the United States has now ended our combat mission in Iraq, and Iraqi troops are taking lead responsibility for their country's security. We've kept a promise made to the American people and to the people of Iraq by drawing down our forces to roughly 50,000. And we're on track to remove all of our troops by the end of next year, according to the agreement signed by President Bush, made with the Iraqi government. Operation Iraqi Freedom is over, but American engagement with Iraq will continue with the mission that begins today, Operation New Dawn. As the name suggests, this ceremony not only marks the change of a command, but the start of a different chapter in the relationship with Iraq. Our remaining troops, I might add as combat ready, if need be, as any in our military, will advise and assist Iraqi forces, support partnered counterterrorism operations, and protect our military and civilian personnel, as well as our infrastructure. We are ramping up our civilian and diplomatic efforts to strengthen Iraqi sovereignty, stability, and self-reliance at the very time we are drawing down combat forces. Our goal is not just a physically secure Iraq, but an economically prosperous and stable one as well. With our Iraqi partners, Our hope is to be able to enhance the ties of trade and commerce, increase our cultural and educational exchanges, open consulates in Basra and Erbil, all to ensure that our engagement spans the breadth and length of this country. Our diplomats will support Iraq's efforts to build strong ties with their neighbors and the wider world while working through the remaining obligations at the United Nations. And here in Baghdad, those efforts will be led by an outstanding ambassador, Jim Jeffrey, who may be new to this particular job, but is certainly not new to the region nor to this country. His knowledge and commitment run deep. They go back to his earlier service in the Bush administration as a Deputy National Security Advisor, as well as, at one point, the DCM right here in Baghdad. And he's backed by an extraordinary team of Foreign Service professionals and civilian experts who are moving to the forefront of our effort now. They've always been engaged, but now they're moving to the forefront. People like Aaron Eddy, a former Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador who now serves outside the wire as a public diplomacy officer on a regional provincial reconstruction team in Kirkuk. Or Madeline Chico, who became an American citizen after her family fled Iraq 3 decades ago and has now chosen to return in 2008 to work with the Ministry of Justice here in Iraq on property rights and rule of law. Or Dave Butzner, a 27-year veteran of the Oregon Police Force, who has since then trained law enforcement officers in Kosovo, Jordan, and Yemen, and who now advises the Iraqi Interior Ministry. Along with our military and diplomats and the civilians in Iraq, they have borne the burden of lengthy deployments, like you in the military, missing anniversaries and holidays, births of children, and the loss of loved ones. This change of mission, to state the obvious, would never have been possible without the resolve and tremendous sacrifice and competence of our military. The finest, if our Iraqi friends will forgive us, the finest fighting force in the world, and I would argue the finest fighting force that ever has existed. And I do not believe that has hyperbole. And that's in large part because it's been led by such a significant group of men and women over the last 3 decades. And I want to thank my friend Secretary Gates for his unique willingness to serve 2 presidents of different parties with differing views, a testimony to Bob's patriotism, his commitment to service, and above all, his determination to see this effort through. He deserves your applause. If you excuse the personal reference, as you used to say in the Senate, this is one good man. One good man. We've also been blessed by the wisdom and steady hand of Admiral Mike Mullen and the leadership of General David Petraeus, who might add is still serving this country in a way that is beyond what we should ask of anyone. I shouldn't joke about this, but I visited him down in Florida, and before he headed off, Bob, and he said, just as I was finally getting to live like the Air Force, you're asking me to move. It was a lovely place. And by the way, we owe his wife and his family as well. And also by General Jim Mattis, who has taken his command. You know, and on his last day of his command, I'd like to especially thank General Ray Odierno. This man is not only a warrior, but a diplomat in the best American tradition. I want to thank him for his exceptional, and I'm not exaggerating, his exceptional service for more than 4 years, leading forces here and working closely with Iraqi political leaders. Many of them sitting here today, and I think they would all acknowledge they have absolute complete faith and trust in this man.